At the graduation ceremony 3 years later, Admiral Zyxdel's crystalline form glowed with unprecedented warmth as he addressed the assembled cadets. 10,000 years of tradition taught us how to be strong, he began, his harmonic tones reaching every corner of the grand hall. But it took our human colleagues to teach us how to be flexible. Today, we don't just celebrate new graduates. We celebrate a new understanding of what it means to be warriors in an ever-changing galaxy. Kira, now wearing the advanced insignia of a senior cadet, stood with her classmates, human and alien alike. The distinctions that had seemed so important years ago had faded in the face of shared challenges and victories. Our strength, she declared in her valedictory address, isn't in our technology, our natural abilities, or even our tactics. It's in our willingness to learn from each other, to see beyond our preconceptions, and to find new ways forward together. Commander Varix, his scales now a peaceful blue, approached Kira after the ceremony. I once thought humans would weaken the academy, he admitted. Instead, you've made us stronger than we ever imagined possible. The stellar military academy had been transformed. Where once stood an institution bound by tradition, now stood a living testament to the power of diversity and adaptation. The human cadets had arrived as unwelcome guests, but graduated as essential members of a galactic community. As the binary star set on graduation day, Admiral Zyxdel made one final entry in the Academy's quantum archives. The greatest victory is not the triumph of one way of thinking over another, but the birth of something entirely new. The humans didn't just survive our academy, they helped us evolve. The next generation of cadets would learn not just the art of war, but the art of change. And in the vast expanse of space, where new challenges lurked behind every star, that lesson would prove more valuable than all the advanced technology in the galaxy. When aliens predicted failure, James mused, watching new human cadets arrive for their first year, Earth's cadets delivered something better than perfection. We delivered possibility. And in the quantum corridors of the Academy, those possibilities continued to grow, spreading like ripples across the face of the galaxy, promising a future where the combined strengths of all species would face whatever challenges the universe had in store. Dexthor's team immediately deployed traditional defenses, energy barriers, quantum disruptors, and telepathic shields. For a moment, it seemed to work. Then the hive adapted, their fractals morphing into new patterns that bypassed every defense. They're not just copying our defenses, Kira realized, watching the patterns shift. They're learning from them, using our own strength against us. She turned to her team. We need to think like our ancestors. Before we had technology, before we had weapons. How do you fight something stronger than you? James grinned. You don't. You make it fight itself. What followed was unlike anything the Academy had ever witnessed. Instead of fighting the hive directly, Kira's team began creating deliberate vulnerabilities in their defenses. When the hive adapted to exploit these weaknesses, they found themselves trapped in recursive loops of their own making. Impossible, Commander Varix muttered, his scales shifting through shades of disbelief. They're using the hive's adaptive nature against itself. The hybrid team moved like a single organism. Void 7 created quantum decoys, while Dexnil's bioluminescence disrupted the hive's communication patterns. Prism 9 refracted energy attacks back through James's carefully calculated trajectories. And at the center of it all, Kira coordinated their efforts with an intuitive understanding of each species' strengths. As Vexthor's team watched their traditional defenses crumble, the truth became undeniable. The future of warfare wouldn't be found in the past. The simulation's success was barely celebrated when reality delivered its own challenge. The Academy's quantum core began experiencing unprecedented fluctuations. Warning signals blared through every corridor. Multiple breaches detected, Lieutenant Cree reported, her mandibles clicking rapidly. Something's invading our systems, but it's not following any known attack pattern. The realization struck like a quantum torpedo. They were under attack by an actual quantum hive splinter group. The simulation had attracted their attention, and now they wanted to prove their superiority over both traditional and hybrid tactics. All cadets to emergency stations, Admiral Zyx Tal commanded, his crystalline form pulsing with urgent frequencies. This is not a drill. But the traditional emergency protocols were failing. The Hive had already learned from the simulation data, anticipating and countering every standard response. The Academy's defenses were falling one by one. In the chaos, Kira's voice cut through the quantum static. "Sir, let us try something unconventional." Admiral Zyx Tal's crystalline structure vibrated with momentary hesitation before he responded, "The Academy is yours, Cadet Patel. Show us what humanity can do." What followed would be recorded in the Academy's archives as the Terra Protocol. Kira and James coordinated a defense that borrowed from Earth's most unlikely sources. The swarming patterns of locusts, the adaptive camouflage of octopi, and even the binary language of human computers. "We're not trying to be stronger," Kira explained as she coordinated the Academy's resources. "We're introducing so much chaos, so many contradictory patterns, that they can't adapt to all of them at once." The entire Academy became a weapon. Crystalline cadets refracted energy in seemingly random patterns. Arcturians created bioluminescent interference. Void entities generated quantum noise that disrupted the Hive's calculations. And through it all, human intuition guided their efforts, creating a symphony of controlled chaos that the Hive couldn't predict or counter. The aftermath of the Hive attack brought changes no one had expected. The Academy's training protocols were completely revised, integrating human adaptability with alien technological advancement. The term Terra Protocol became standard doctrine for dealing with adaptive enemies. The exercise continued for 2 hours. Throughout each scenario, the human cadets demonstrated unconventional but eerily effective approaches. They used environmental features that other species had dismissed as irrelevant. They combined their teammates' natural abilities in ways that had never been documented in the Academy's combat manuals. "It's their history," Kira explained later during the debriefing. "Humans have always had to adapt. We didn't have natural weapons like claws or energy projection. We had to study our environment, understand our prey, use tools, work together. Every piece of technology we developed came from observing and adapting." Admiral Zyx Tal's crystalline form pulsed with intense frequencies as he reviewed the combat data. The human success rate in the scenarios was unprecedented, not because they were stronger or more advanced, but because they thought differently. "They see patterns we've become blind to," Lieutenant Cree observed. "Their primitive perspective gives them an advantage. They haven't been conditioned by millennia of standardized tactical doctrine." But not everyone was impressed. A group of senior Arcturian cadets, led by the renowned warrior scholar Vex Thor, watched the humans with growing resentment. Their ancient combat traditions, refined over thousands of years, were being challenged by these newcomers who barely understood quantum mechanics. "This is a mockery," Vex Thor declared, his bioluminescent crest flaring with anger. "They succeed through chaos and improvisation, not proper military discipline." The tension came to a head during an evening training session. Vex Thor and his followers cornered James in the quantum mechanics lab, their crests pulsing with threatening patterns. "You humans don't belong here," Vex Thor stated. "Your presence diminishes the Academy's standards." James stood his ground, but before the confrontation could escalate, Kira appeared with Void 7 and, surprisingly, Dex Nil. "Standards?" Kira challenged. "Like working together, regardless of species? Like finding new solutions instead of clinging to old ones just because they're traditional?" Dex Nil stepped forward, his own crest pulsing with determination. "They've shown us new ways to use our abilities, Vex Thor. Ways our ancestors never imagined." The standoff was interrupted by the arrival of Admiral Zyx Tal, his crystalline form casting rainbow refractions across the lab's walls. "Perhaps," he announced, his tone carrying harmonics of authority, "it's time for a formal demonstration." All eyes turned to the Admiral as he continued, "Tomorrow, we will hold an unprecedented exercise. Traditional methods versus human adaptation. The results will speak for themselves." As the cadets dispersed, Commander Varrix approached his superior. "Admiral, Are you certain this is wise? The humans' unorthodox methods are exactly what this academy needs, ZYXTAL interrupted, his crystal matrix glowing with intensity. For 10,000 years, we've taught the same tactics, followed the same doctrines. But the galaxy is changing. The quantum hive grows stronger. The void entities expand their influence. Perhaps what we need isn't another 10,000 years of tradition, but a new perspective. A human perspective. That night, as Kira and James prepared for the next day's challenge, they knew they weren't just fighting for their place at the academy anymore. They were fighting to prove that humanity's greatest strength wasn't its technology or physical capabilities, but its ability to see possibilities where others saw only obstacles. The stage was set for a confrontation that would either bridge the gap between species or widen it forever. The Academy's grand simulation chamber stretched across an entire asteroid segment, its quantum matrices capable of generating scenarios more real than reality itself. Today, it would host the most ambitious training exercise in the Academy's history. Two teams stood ready. Vexthor led the traditional squad, composed of elite Arcturian and crystalline cadets. Kira commanded the hybrid team, including James, Void 7, Dex Nil, and Prism 9. The scenario: defend against a quantum hive invasion, an enemy that had consistently defeated conventional tactics. Remember, Admiral ZYXTAL announced, his crystalline form resonating with authority, this simulation uses real combat parameters. What you experience here will feel entirely real. The chamber hummed to life. Reality shifted, and the teams found themselves on a contested space station. The quantum hive's signature black fractals began appearing on the walls. Their invasion had begun. How? Lieutenant Cree demanded. Their technology is primitive, their bodies unaugmented. Because, James O'Connor answered, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber, humans have been fighting gravity our entire evolutionary history. Every step we take, every move we make, we're battling 9.8 meters per second squared. We're born warriors of gravity. ZYXTAL observed as the human cadets helped their fellow students recover, sharing water and support regardless of species. His crystalline structure resonated with a new frequency, one of uncertainty, but also of interest. Perhaps, he mused, watching Kira demonstrate a breathing technique to a struggling crystalline cadet, we have underestimated these humans. Commander Varrix's scales had shifted to a troubled blue. This was one test, Admiral. They're still primitives playing at being galactic citizens. No, ZYXTAL corrected, his crystal matrix glowing with sudden insight. They're survivors who have fought their way up from the depths of their gravity well, past their atmospheric barriers, and through the void of space to reach us. And they did it all with primitive technology. He turned to face his staff. The question isn't whether they belong here. The question is, what else might they teach us? As the day ended, news of the humans' performance in the gravity chamber had spread throughout the academy. Whispers echoed through the quantum corridors and crystalline halls. The humans had not just survived their first test, they had excelled. And this was only the beginning. He combat simulation arena hummed with quantum energy as Lieutenant Cree adjusted the parameters for the day's training exercise. 6 weeks had passed since the humans' arrival, and despite their surprising performance in the gravity chamber, many instructors still expected their primitive nature to show through eventually. Today's exercise, Commander Varrix announced, his scales shimmering with anticipation, will test your tactical adaptation capabilities. The arena will generate random combat scenarios. Your objective is survival. The first-year cadets stood in mixed species teams of 3. Kira Patel found herself grouped with Void 7 and an Arcturian named Lyxna. James O'Connor stood with Dex Nil and a crystalline cadet called Prism 9. The arena's quantum field could generate solid light constructs, creating everything from terrain to enemies. Begin sequence, Varrix commanded. The arena transformed into a hostile alien jungle. Crystalline predators emerged from the undergrowth, their faceted bodies refracting deadly energy beams. Standard tactical doctrine called for energy shields and long-range engagement, but the humans did something unexpected. Instead of deploying shields, Kira dropped and rolled, grabbing a handful of phosphorescent moss from the ground. She smeared it across her uniform in quick, deliberate strokes. "Quick," she called to her teammates. "These crystals work like prisms, we need to break up our outlines." Void 7 flickered uncertainly before following her lead, its quantum form adopting a similar camouflage pattern. Lyxna's bioluminescent crest pulsed with confusion, but she too applied the moss. "What are they doing?" Admiral Zyxtal demanded from the observation deck. "That's not standard combat protocol." "They're adapting," Lieutenant Cree replied, her mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "Like their ancestors hunting on the savannas of their homeworld." Across the arena, James O'Connor's team faced a different challenge, a swarm of quantum wasps, each capable of delivering devastating energy stings. Instead of attempting to shoot them down, the traditional approach, James grabbed a piece of fallen crystal and struck it against another, creating a high-pitched resonance. The wasps, attracted to the frequency, gathered around the sound. "Dexnil, your bioluminescence!" James shouted. "Create a pattern like this." He moved his hands in a hypnotic wave. Understanding dawned in Dexnil's eyes. His natural bioluminescence pulsed in the pattern James demonstrated, creating a trap that drew the wasps into a concentrated area. Prism 9 then generated a single, powerful energy burst, eliminating the entire swarm. "Impossible," Varrix muttered. "They're using Class 2 tactics to achieve Class 5 results." High Admiral Zyxtal's crystalline appendages shimmered with barely contained irritation as he watched the first human transport ship dock at the Stellar Military Academy's main hangar. The ancient space station, carved from a single asteroid in the Centauri system, had trained the galaxy's finest military officers for over 10 millennia. Now, for the first time, it would host cadets from Earth, a species that had barely mastered basic interplanetary travel. "This is an insult to our institution," Commander Varrix hissed through his respiratory chambers, his scaled skin shifting from its usual emerald to a deep crimson. "They still use combustion engines on their civilian vehicles." "The Council's decision is final," Zyxtal responded, his crystalline form catching the light of the nearby binary stars. "Earth is now part of the Galactic Defense Alliance. They've earned their place here." "Earned?" Derrick's scales flashed yellow with incredulity. "Their species hasn't even unified their planetary government. They're centuries behind the Arcturians, millennia behind the Crystalline Collective." Below them, the first group of human cadets emerged from their transport. Their basic uniforms looked primitive compared to the morphic suits worn by other species. Leading the group was a young woman with dark skin and determined eyes, Cadet Kira Patel, according to the files. Behind her walked James O'Connor, a tall, red-haired man whose casual stance belied the impressive physical scores in his entrance exams. The human's arrival had already caused quite a stir among the other first-year cadets. A group of Arcturians, their bioluminescent crests pulsing with disdain, watched from a distance. The crystalline students simply turned away, their faceted bodies reflecting their disapproval in complex patterns of light. "At least they'll provide some entertainment," Lieutenant Cree said, her insectoid mandibles clicking with amusement. "I give them one stellar cycle before they break." As if hearing the comment, Kira Patel looked up toward the observation deck. Her eyes met Zyxtal's crystalline sensors, and to his surprise, she smiled and offered a crisp military salute. The gesture was primitive, but the confidence behind it was unmistakable. "First test begins in 1 hour," Varrix announced, checking his quantum interface. "The gravity chamber should sort them out quickly enough." The gravity chamber was typically used to acclimate new cadets to various gravitational conditions they might encounter in the field. It was also, unofficially, used to weed out those who couldn't handle the physical demands of the academy. The chamber could simulate up to 50 times standard gravity, though most species struggled past 10. An hour later, Kira Patel stood in the chamber alongside cadets from 7 different species. The Arcturian next to her, Dexnil, flexed his bioluminescent muscles with obvious superiority. The test was simple. Remain standing as gravity gradually increased. Begin sequence, Barrix commanded, his scales now a satisfied purple. The gravity began to climb. At 5 times standard gravity, the crystalline cadets began to crack under the pressure. At 8 times, the Arcturians were struggling to remain upright. At 10 times, only 3 cadets remained standing, Dex nil, barely maintaining his composure, a quantum entity named Void 7, and, to everyone's shock, Kira Patel impossible, Barrix muttered, checking the readings. Their bones should be crushing. Kira's face was strained, sweat dripping down her forehead, but her stance remained firm. James O'Connor, who had dropped to one knee at 9 times gravity, called out from his position, "Remember the pressure training, Kira. Just like the Marianas Trench." At 12 times gravity, Dex nil finally collapsed. Void 7 flickered out of existence at 13, leaving only the human standing. Her legs trembled, but her eyes remained focused, her breathing controlled. "Enough," ZYXTAL announced, his crystalline form pulsing with an emotion he couldn't quite identify. Test concluded. As the gravity returned to normal, Kira helped James to his feet, then moved to assist the Arcturian cadet. Dex nil stared at her offered hand with confusion before accepting.